Hey guys, so in this short lecture, we're going to talk through a few key concepts or central themes in Darwinian medicine, which is essentially a synonym for evolutionary medicine. So that way you kind of have an idea of what precisely this topic is and how it can be applied to a vast array of topics in health and disease. And then just to reiterate the definition, Darwinian medicine is essentially just the application of Darwinian evolutionary principles to topics in medicine. So here are some of the core principles in Darwinian medicine. There's 10 of them that I particularly like, and you'll see that I highlighted a couple of them, bolded a few of those I think are particularly important. So you can refer back to this slide. It'll be useful when you come across other topics and are trying to think through them in an evolutionary framework. But right now we'll go through the 6 or so bolded topics in a bit more detail. So first off is this important idea of levels of causation. And so all things in biology have different levels, different hierarchies of levels of causation. So we can split them into kind of two broad categories, the first being what's called the proximate or mechanistic cause, and the second being the ultimate, or also known as evolutionary cause. So the proximate cause explains a trait in terms of down and dirty immediate physiological or genetic or environmental factors. So it's very mechanistic. It's the mechanism by which something is occurring, often refers to genes or proteins and the like. In contrast, the ultimate cause, or evolutionary cause, explains a trait in the broader big picture sense in terms of what evolutionary forces are acting on them. So in this course on evolutionary medicine, quite often we concern ourselves, we remain in the realm of the ultimate causes, the big picture view. So if we take sickle cell anemia or sickle cell disease as an example, and you ask what the proximate cause of sickle cell anemia was, you could say that sickle cell anemia is caused by a single base pair mutation, single point mutation in a gene. You could also say that it's due to a mutated hemoglobin protein, or you could say that it's due to the fact that cells malform under hypoxia when there's low oxygen and clog up blood vessels. All of those, even though they're kind of at different levels, are kind of at the down and dirty mechanistic cause. They're at different levels. Some are down to the level of genetics, some are a bit more higher order, but on the whole, they're concerning themselves with the mechanism. If you look at sickle cell anemia from the evolutionary viewpoint, though, that's the only way it really makes sense. So the ultimate cause of sickle cell anemia can be said to be selection for malaria resistance that's found among heterozygote carriers of the trait. So the fact that these heterozygotes have enough of a reproductive advantage because they survive malaria in some populations to offset the fact that a bunch of kids sadly die who are homozygotes carriers for the trait. So here's another example, adult milk drinking, or persistence of the ability to digest lactose into adulthood, which is kind of a weird thing for mammals to do. Usually, only infants drink milk, and typically from their own species, whereas a lot of humans consume milk from other species, which is kind of weird when you think about it. But anyway, the proximate cause of for the ability to drink and digest milk into adulthood is a mutation in the gene that encodes for the lactase enzyme. But also if you can also explain it in terms of the ultimate cause, which is pretty simple, it's that folks that had access to animal protein and calories from milk had a reproductive advantage, and that increased fitness caused the variant that conferred the enzyme persistence to spread throughout the population. Okay, so the next kind of big idea or central key theme in evolutionary medicine is that all evolutionary processes can impact traits and diseases. So here listed are the 4 forces of evolution that we've discussed before, and a lot of focus is given to natural selection in evolutionary medicine. It's the kind of the flashiest, but I've railed against this idea and told you to beware of the trap of thinking that all things are due to natural selection, that all things are adaptations. It's important to remember that mutation, drift, and gene flow are also important in impacting traits with relevance to health. So on the right here, you see a picture of the hands of a kid with Ellis-Van Creveld syndrome, which is an autosomal recessive disease, very rare with only about 150 known cases. And it's prevalent among the Old Order Amish. And so mutation in the EVC gene, coupled along with the fact that there's a small population with an intense founder effect, and also with not terribly much gene flow into the population, all those factors together may mean that natural selection may be working to remove it, this deleterious mutation, but might have a difficulty overcoming these other factors. So anyway, long story short, it's important to keep in mind that multiple evolutionary forces, multiple evolutionary processes are acting on all diseases we talk about in this class. Next up is the notion of what the primacy of reproductive success. So it's important to remember and keep in mind that natural selection works to increase fitness, not health. And in this case, we're not talking about fitness meaning being in good shape. In this case, the fitness is the average reproductive success of individuals with a given trait. So here, natural selection is improving health, but only with the end goal of having more offspring. So only insofar as better health typically leads to surviving long enough to have reproduction that then go on to survive and reproduce. So for instance, if some random person on the street bumped into you and said, who's more fit, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson or Danny DeVito, you'd of course say, why are you talking to me and asking me these weird ass questions? But you'd probably say that The Rock is more fit than Danny DeVito. However, both of those guys have 3 kids. So in this evolutionary sense, to folks in the evolutionary medicine classroom, you would say that they actually have equal fitness. An important kind of corollary to this idea that reproductive success is all that matters, not necessarily health, is that selection is going to be ignorant, more or less, to anything that happens after your reproductive years. So selection can sometimes tend to invest in health and in the prime reproductive years at the expense of poor health or even death in older age. And here I'm committing a little bit of a cardinal sin and kind of personifying natural selection. Obviously, it's not actually like a thinking force, but it's kind of a convenient way to think about it, and it's kind of hard not to do it. So anyway, examples of this include heart disease, Alzheimer's disease, things that affect people that on the whole are after their reproductive years. An example of this as well is prostate enlargement, which will happen essentially to every single person who has a prostate if they live to be 100 years old. So it makes sense. It makes a lot of sense to have the prostate close in the position that's currently in. It helps to maximize reproductive success in prime reproductive years for the young. But however, it's a fairly stupid idea that the prostate surrounds the urethra. And so if there's expansion of those cells, hypertrophy of the prostate, you can actually cut off the urethra, which is obviously an important thing since that's how people urinate. So essentially, it's prostate enlargement, cutting off the ureter that the prostate surrounds is a stupid evolutionary move, but to natural selection, it makes sense because it helps maximize the number of kids in the prime reproductive age. Another central idea of evolutionary medicine is that there's evolutionary trade-offs, meaning that there could be changes in one trait that improve fitness, but they may very well change other traits that ends up having a decrease in fitness in those traits. If it's on the whole better for the organism, it will persist. We can expect it to persist. So an example that I love, since I'm an anthropologist, is bipedality, or walking on 2 legs. So we humans, we bipedal hominins, evolved from quadrupedal apes, meaning apes that walk on 4 limbs. You'll see here a skeleton of a human on the left and a gorilla on the right, doing knuckle walking. The benefits of standing upright are myriad. So, for instance, it frees our hands for doing food manipulation and tool use. It's more than likely much more energy efficient to stride on 2 legs than walking on 4. We can also kind of raise our head up so we have a greater field of vision. We can see over tall grasses and see predators coming and see food off in the distance. But it does come at some cost. Essentially, everything that your parents and you one day complain about, all your skeletal problems, all of that can be kind of blamed on bipedality. So if you have a bad back, you got a bad neck, you have bad knees, bad hips, all of those things can be linked pretty closely to the fact that we are bipeds that arose imperfectly from quadrupedal apes. We'll talk a bit more later on about all the skeletal changes that have to happen to go from being an ape on all fours up to an ape on two legs. But you can kind of think through it and realize that just about every element of the skeleton has to change. So everything from the fact that the spine enters our skull in a different location. It enters at the bottom because our skull is perched on the spinal column rather than from the back, like in chimps and gorillas. Our spine is reoriented, so it can't have the C shape of a gorilla because it's kind of on top because it's kind of balancing on top of one another. All the vertebrae have to be in a kind of S shape to have some more stability. And then our pelvis, for instance, is bowl-shaped to hold up our organs that are now resting on it. Our arms no longer have to be adapted to, strong enough and robust enough to climb trees. They've gotten puny and gracile, but good at tool manipulation. For instance, another differences are our femurs kind of angle in to make walking more efficient. And then even down to our toes, we have a massive ankle to absorb the shock of landing on our heel, and then an arched foot to again absorb some of those impacts. So every single bit of the human skeleton has been impacted by the switch to bipedality. Darn near. Another key tenet in evolutionary medicine is the value and utility of phylogeny or phylogenetics in inferring evolutionary trees to understand the relationship between species, populations, pathogens, for instance. The utility in all of this in understanding traits and disease. So, for instance, here is an evolutionary tree of the HIV virus and related viruses. So how to read these evolutionary trees will be a focus of a lesson in a few weeks. But you can see here up in the maroon color, the HIV-1 is the most prevalent human HIV virus, the one that was first discovered. And then down in the bluish color in the bottom is HIV-2. It's more common in Western Africa. It's becoming more common elsewhere, though the numbers are still relatively small. And these two viruses are 55% different. But you can see all the other lines in here, the orange viruses and the green viruses and some of the black ones are other closely related viruses from different non-human primates. And so with this data, we'll talk about this later on, you can tell that, for instance, the HIV-1 virus, the closest relative to that is actually viruses found in chimpanzees, suggesting that we got HIV-1 from chimpanzees. Similarly, HIV-2 is actually most closely related to various monkey SIV strains. So SIV here is the simian immunodeficiency virus, whereas HIV is the human one. And so based on this tree, we can also deduce that there's been at least two separate instances where humans have contracted this disease from our non-human primate brethren. Another kind of central idea in evolutionary medicine is the idea of an evolutionary mismatch. And so this is the general idea that disease risks differ for organisms living in different environments if they're different from the ones that their ancestors lived in. So this is a diorama from the American Museum of Natural History showing a Homo erectus hominin, one of our hominin ancestors, collecting some seeds or something, some tiny amount of food, but about to get destroyed by a giant hyena in the upper right. So we no longer have to really worry about foraging for nuts and berries, and we also don't have to particularly worry about getting eaten by hyenas. So in many ways, the evolution that we live in is quite different than what our hominin ancestors did. This can be taken too far, and people can say blanket statements like we don't live in environments to which we are adapted, but it's important to remember that adaptation did not stop happening when we, were Stone Age, Paleolithic people dwelling in caves. So there's certainly no one environment to which we're adapted. However, it definitely is true that for most of our history, our environment is very different from the world we inhabit today. This is from one of the readings for the class, and it shows a bunch of major events in human history and in the time when important diseases first infected humans. So modern humans arose 200,000 or 300,000 years ago. Important differences include the fact that people lived in small bands in a very tropical climate. they were hunting and gathering food. Eventually, they managed to get animal protein from scavenging carcasses, and then eventually later on hunted. But then major changes include the out of Africa migration, so moving into a massively different temperate location. Early agriculture and animal domestication about 12,000 years ago, which arose in different parts of the world and spread relatively fast. And then since with the common ancestor, so since 0 AD or 0 CE, there's been increasing connections in the Common Era and acceleration in the increase of population density. And COVID-19 is the best example of globalization having major impact on pandemic spread. So obviously we'll be talking about that shortly. So yeah, refer back to this slide often. I think it'll be a handy little cheat sheet of these kind of core principles in Darwinian medicine. So when you're trying to think of the ultimate evolutionary reasons for a trait, especially one that's relevant to disease or to health, these will be your kind of guiding shorthand ideas for ways that evolution can be impacting that trait, so to give us a better framework for understanding how it came to be.